Okay. So I would like to say good evening to everybody and welcome to Bird Tales. This is our annual event. And I think I looked at the old poster that my daughter made years and years ago. I think this is actually our 10th annual Bird Tales event. So um, it's pretty amazing. My
Mhm.
name is Julie Filiberti,
Come watch
and I am a current board member for the Friends of Missisquoi National Wildlife Refuge. And that it is us that is hosting the presentation this evening. And our Friends organization is proud to support our wonderful refuge, which is only one of two national wildlife refuges in Vermont. So if you've never been to Missisquoi before, we encourage you to head up and do so. Um, we're up in the northwest corner of Vermont in Swanton, and Missisquoi was established in 1943 to provide a protected resting area for migrating waterfowl. And then 70 years later, in 2013, these federal lands were designated a Ramsar wetland of international importance. Missisquoi also has the distinction of being an Audubon Important Bird Area. And since its inception, the refuge has increased in size to over 6,500 acres of wetlands, floodplain forest, managed grasslands, and shrublands. There are 5 trails to walk on, and the Missisquoi River and the Dead Creek to paddle on. The refuge is always open from sunup to sundown in all seasons, but visitors must stay on the marked trails or on the water. So, a walk on the refuge in any season will treat you to something wonderful, be it mammal, be it bird, be it insect, butterfly, or just peaceful natural scenery to heal the soul. So, our Friends group was established in 2002 to support the refuge. And we do that in a variety of ways. We give financial support, we acquire grant funding to help with invasive species control, we advocate for the refuge and the National Wildlife Refuge System as a whole. And then we organize events like this one to bring people out to the refuge and bring awareness to the refuge. The Friends rarely do any active fundraising, so all of our revenue to support the refuge comes through either memberships or donations. And in virtual events such as this, we can't put out a donation jar to solicit a few dollars. So if you're able to, you can show your support for Missisquoi by visiting our website. And hopefully, Rich can put that in the chat. It's friendsofmissisquoi.org. It's pretty easy. Um, the best way to show your support is actually by becoming a Friends member. Um, so if you go to the website, you'll see an option to join us. And it's easy to do online. You'll be sharing your appreciation of the public lands and its wild places. It's not necessary, but if you want to give a donation, there's a donation button on the website as well that will go directly to us, which then goes directly to supporting the refuge. Um, we thank you in advance for any support you wish to give. You can actually leave a comment too, how you like bird tails. We'd love to hear your feedback. So before we start the evening, we would like to take a minute to honor the Abenaki by acknowledging the refuge lands. So I'm going to read our land acknowledgement. The lands and waters of the Missisquoi National Wildlife Refuge are very special places to those who make it their home. And we, as the current stewards of this area, recognize our responsibilities in caring for these lands and waters. We recognize that these lands and waters are also important to the Abenaki Nation of Missisquoi, the previous caretakers of this land. We are grateful to them and their ancestors for caring for this land and its surrounding waters for thousands of years. We understand the importance of this land in the indigenous heritage of the region and to the Abenaki present and past. We recognize the hardships and suffering these families endured when they were pushed out of their traditional ancestral lands as European colonization took hold. And we acknowledge their agony and despair when their access to the Delta for subsistence was ended by the creation of this wildlife refuge. We invite our visitors to share in honoring this Abenaki home by engaging in mindfulness while enjoying the refuge lands and waters, and by holding the space with care and appreciation. Thank you. Uh, all right. I think we are ready. I'm going to introduce you to our first storyteller, which is me. Um, so I'm going to share a short presentation of one of my reliable winter birding spots and the winter birds you can find there. So, winter birding on Dunsmore Road. Okay, so Dunsmore Road, where is it? Dunsmore is in St. Albans, and it runs from Route 36, which is McQuamshire Road in the south, up to Route 38, which is Lower Newton Road in the north. And it's a little bit less than 3 miles long. Mainly, you can tell by this, there are just large farm fields. I've marked a couple of the bigger farms in the area. It's not very well treed. There are a few trees along the road in places, but it's mainly farm fields. So this is the reliable place for me to find snow buntings, horned larks, and almost always Lapland longspurs, although there might have been a few years where I didn't get to see those. So snow buntings. These cute little white birds breed in the high Arctic. They nest in cracks and crevices up there. And then when it's time to migrate, they come south to Vermont for the winter and lots of other places and find fields and lake shores and hang out. And they're usually in pretty big flocks. We also have the horned larks. They breed in the high Arctic as well, but you'll also find breeding populations in Canada and other places in the lower 48. They actually can excavate a small depression if they can't find one, where they build a small woven nest into it. They get their name from these little feather tufts that you see on the top of their head. That's why they're called horned larks. And the Lapland longspurs, another high Arctic breeding bird. They make a woven cup of grasses on the ground, and they actually winter as far south as even in the southern US, down into the Carolinas, close to Texas, maybe even in Texas. So they get their name from that long claw on the back of their foot. So that's why they're called the longspurs. So this is a picture of what Dunsmore Road kind of looks like. And I think my husband can vouch, it's either a hit or miss birding adventure on Dunsmore Road, because there have been times that we see amazing things, and then there are other times that we will drive the entire length of the road and not see anything, like literally not see anything. So when that happens, we basically turn around and we go do it again, and sometimes have a completely different experience going the other way. So it's pretty crazy how that is consistent for us. So sometimes the winter birds are really easy to find. They could be up on a wire. This is probably one of the only times that I've seen them on the wire, but they will do that. A lot of times we will find them in the feed because they make these large feed piles, and one of them is usually very close to the road. So sometimes you'll find starlings in there, sometimes you'll find snow buntings in there. but they go in there to forage. That's another time that they're easy to find. Snow cover definitely helps. So a lot of times we will go searching after we've had a pretty good snowfall because that tends to bring them out to the roadsides for one, and number two, it helps you to be able to see them because camouflage totally happens. When you have a snow cover that is just partial, you're basically looking at brown and white birds in a brown and white field, and you literally don't see them until they fly, if they fly, which is why sometimes you can drive the road and not see anything, and then when you come back, you'll see a flock of 400 birds. So these are just a few pictures that I've taken of these birds. There's a snow bunting and a horned lark. And my favorite is the Lapland longspur. The um the trick is finding these. These are what I call the needle in the haystack bird because there are not um, a lot of them. You know, you'll find large flocks of buntings. I think maybe, even in the 2 to 400 range, and you'll find the large flocks of the horned larks. But sometimes those flocks will mix, and you'll have a mixed flock of both, and the Lapland longspurs will mix in with them. So there's usually not very many of them, and trying to find them in a flock of birds that's foraging and camouflaged, it's difficult. But when they come out to the roadside, which they do to feed along kind of the edges of the road, that's when you can really get a good look at them and see them. And actually, just last week, when we were riding the road, we found 6 longspurs all by themselves, which was surprising because they're usually in with the other birds. And it's also a great place for raptors because there are so many large flocks of birds. So in addition to these winter birds that hang out there, the large farms provide usually big flocks of starlings. I think I've counted as many as 700. Um, you'll have pigeons. So the raptors, they know where to go. And I've pretty much seen, I think, all raptors that you could possibly see um, on Dunsmore at one time or another, including the peregrine, which I've actually seen a great chase happen. So they go down and get some of these winter birds when they're feeding and not paying attention. So it's a good place to go if you are local and you're looking for some of these birds. So I just wanted to share that. It's not really a story, but it's kind of a winter birding story. So make a trip to Dunsmore before they're gone, which they will be very soon. So next we have Heather Kosher. So she will be sharing about the Christmas, or now some of them are called winter bird counts. So Heather is a self-described bird nerd from the age of 10 when she researched birds in the World Book Encyclopedia, avidly watched birds at her family's feeder, and occasionally tried to catch one. She delights in bald eagle nest monitoring and the Winter Bald Eagle Survey, and has joyfully participated in at least 20 Christmas bird counts around the country. She loves the challenge of writing articles about the Christmas bird counts that are entertaining for everyone, not just birders. Her sanctuary is in Isle-la-Motte, where she lives with her beloved bird nerdy wife, 4 spoiled fur babies, and an abundance of well-fed avian friends. So I'll turn it over to you, Heather.
Okay, I'm going to be talking about the wonders of winter bird counts. In the 19th century, Americans widely believed that our abundant wildlife was virtually inextinguishable. The passenger pigeon, once the most common bird in North America, their number estimated at 3 to 5 billion, were described as living clouds that darkened the entire sky for days. Their migration called a biological storm. It took only half a century of humans indiscriminately hunting every creature possible until the last passenger pigeon, named Martha, perished alone in the Cincinnati Zoo in 1914. In February 1886, ornithologist Frank Chapman went birding in Manhattan, New York City. He saw the usual birds he expected, but found the most incredible diversity on people's heads. He reported in Field and Stream magazine that out of about 700 hats, 542 had feathers, wings, or even entire birds, encompassing at least 42 species. He reported that mutilation made it impossible to identify them all. In fact, during this time, 60 bird species faced extinction just for fashion. During the 19th century, the Christmas side hunt became very popular in the States, with teams of hunters competing to kill the most birds and any other creature they could on Christmas Day. The sheer amount of creatures was likely impossible to eat before spoiling and included non-game songbirds as well. Frank Chapman, concerned about the dwindling bird population from hunting, proposed an alternative to the holiday slaughter, a Christmas bird census. The results were reported in Bird Lore magazine, the magazine that he founded in 1899. And here is his request from December 1900. I'm going to read it to you because it's a little hard to read there. Now, Bird Lore proposes a new kind of Christmas side hunt in the form of a Christmas bird census, and we hope that all our readers who have the opportunity will aid us in making it a success by spending a portion of Christmas Day with the birds and sending a report of their hunt to Bird Lore before they retire that night. Such reports should be headed by the locality, hour of starting and of returning, character of the weather, direction and force of the wind, and the temperature, the latter taken when starting. The birds observed should then be added following the order in which they are given in the American Ornithology Union checklist, with, if possible, the exact or approximate number of individuals of each species observed. Promptness in sending these lists to Bird Lore at Englewood, New Jersey, is urged in order that the best of them may be published in our February number, where they will be not only of interest to other participants in our census, but will also constitute, in a measure, a census of Christmas bird life. On Christmas Day in 1900, he led the first Christmas bird count. 27 birders from 25 locations in the US and Canada counted 18,500 birds of 89 species. The highest number of individuals counted were herring gulls, crows, and red-winged blackbirds. In comparison to today, the highest numbers in the U.S. counted are red-winged blackbirds, snow geese, and European starlings. The most widespread bird species counted in the most circles in 1900 were chickadees and American tree sparrows. And today, it's European starlings and downy woodpeckers are the most widespread across the circles. What did Frank Chapman count on his first Christmas bird census in Englewood, New Jersey? We can read all about it in Bird Lore, and here's his account. Time, 8:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Clear. Wind, southwest and light. Temperature, 33 degrees. Bobwhite, 3. Mourning dove, 7. Red-shouldered hawk, 1. Barred owl, 1. Downy woodpecker, 5. Flickers, 3. Crow, 25. Blue jay, 8. Goldfinch, 1. Tree sparrow, 150. Field sparrow, 2. Junco, 37. Song sparrow, 3. Northern shrike, 1. Mature. warbler, 55. White-breasted nuthatch, 2. Chickadee, 12. Bluebird, 4. 1 singing. Total 18 species, 320 individuals. On December 1st and again on the 20th, a single tufted titmouse was seen, these observations constituting the first winter records for this species. Frank M. Chapman. Bird Lore magazine and its Christmas bird count helped build a public interest in conservation. In 1905, the National Audubon Society was formed from 30 birding societies, led by environmentalists like Harriet Hemingway and her cousin Minna B. Hall from Boston, over concerns for birds used in the feather fashion trade. They hosted teas as early as 1896 to encourage Boston women to give up their feather hats. With their help, the Audubon Society helped pass legislation to protect birds, including the Audubon Plumage Law in 1910 that protected wading birds from the depredations of the plume industry, and the 1918 Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which is still one of the strongest bird protection laws in the world today, making it illegal to kill any non-game bird in the U.S. These inspiring people can remind us that it takes just one person to make a difference and a few to make an impact. And we can not allow ourselves to get overwhelmed. We don't have to do everything, but we all have to do something to protect the most vulnerable among us. The Christmas bird count, now hosted by the National Audubon Society, is the longest running citizen science project in the world. With 126 years of data, the count shows trends in bird populations over time and informs conservation decisions. Today, there are 2,693 counts across 20 countries and territories, encompassing the entire Western Hemisphere, building community with 83,100 birders, counting 44,259,423 individual birds of 2,503 species. But who's counting? This past year, there were 39 new species counted, 90% from 3 new circles in Peru. So how do birders count every bird they see or hear in a 15-mile circle on a designated day between December 14th and January 4th? Very carefully. If it's a rare bird for the area, one should try to get a photo. Even one taken rather resourcefully through a scope will do. Sometimes it's rather easy, like capturing these 6 fabulous snow geese, luxuriating on the beaches of Lake Champlain. And sometimes it's difficult to determine the vast numbers of their closest friends. And in cases like these, it's best to employ one's closest friends and bird nerds to help you count. Although winter is a great time to survey bird populations because they're mostly in place, not migrating, the conditions can be challenging. The harsh winter wind can make it difficult to hear owls, but sometimes you get lucky and see one instead. Despite hearing no confirmable owls this year, a barred owl flew right in front of us as we were busily looking for songbirds in the brush. It perched in a tree and didn't mind us photographing it. As harsh as the weather can be in Vermont for the CBC, we can only imagine how the northernmost circle of bird counters in the Arctic Bay of Nunavut, Canada, cope. This is 500 miles north of the Arctic Circle. Of note, last year they counted the fewest number of species in last year's CBC, 3 species, the rock ptarmigan, eider, and the raven. And some years, though, this is a good year for them because some years they only get ravens, as they have a year-round flock of about 300. Some birds have a special way of mesmerizing us, like the snowy owl. And we can all imagine all the years of birders counting them with similar wonder. This one made the count and the cover in 1918. Sometimes you can just imagine where you think a bird might be. Remembrances of CBC's past. An elusive ruffed grouse, perhaps, flush from a favorite deadwood perch, or knots and bumps on trees that could be that. Could it be? Brown creeper, brown creeper. The whole team screams. Even the most common birds are dutifully and beautifully counted like this glorious chickadee. And we can't forget our feeder watchers. CBC teams really do rely on their feeder watchers to help them count many backyard species and hopefully not hunt them. A sense of humor is very important for winter bird counters. When you need to trudge through knee-deep snow to go back to the car to get your spotting scope for a confusing raft of ducks disappearing into the whitecaps, only to discover that they're just really good decoys. Talk about challenging water counting. The southernmost circle of the CBC occurs in the Drake Passage in the South Atlantic Ocean, known to be some of the roughest seas in the world. This count is done entirely by boat. One rough year, count day fell during a snowstorm here on our circle in Isle of Lamont. My wife and I were counting, and we were attempting to use the scope on the side of the road to view some distant ducks. And then we heard a sound. It wasn't a bird, alas. It was a plow barreling down upon us. There was no room for it to pass by us, so I jumped back in my station wagon and zoomed down the road, leaving my wife on the side of the road. And I had to drive about 2 miles to find a place to turn around with the plow behind me blowing snow. I did find a place to turn around. I turned around, went back, and we realized that I had left the back hatch open and the entire car was full of snow. And this was just the beginning of our birding day. Snowy bushes may hide many secrets and occasionally an amusing mourning dove. Bare treetops can cause birders to shout in excitement for a simple squirrel's nest that was surely a raptor. And sometimes it really is. Sometimes birds are not where you expect them to be. And sometimes they're not even birds. And when in doubt of what you think you see, you can always check your Petersons. With whimsy and wonder, I honor all those who celebrate birds, no matter the season. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I've been fooled by the decoys too, so. Okay, our next storyteller is Ryan Mandelbaum. Ryan is a science writer and an urban naturalist who specializes in quantum physics on weekdays and birds on nights and weekends. Ryan is an educator at the New York City Bird Alliance, member of the Finch Research Network Board, and the author of Wild NYC. So take it away, Ryan.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I think you can all see my screen now. So I'm going to tell you about the time that my favorite bird flew over my house. Well, thank you for introducing me. That's me, Ryan. You all know now what I do. So on November 22nd and November 29th of 2022, my favorite bird flew over my home. Now, it wouldn't be that weird if my favorite bird was something like a chickadee or a cardinal or a blue jay. And it wouldn't be weird if I lived someplace like the tropics or, a beautiful verdant eastern forest. But I live in New York City in a pretty normal old apartment line street. And my favorite bird is the red crossbill, a conifer forest loving finch. And that is very weird. So let me tell you a bit about my favorite bird, the red crossbill. So, to be honest, the reason that this is my favorite bird is a little silly, and it really has nothing to do at all with the bird or its ecology. And this is like a very deeply millennial coded reference that unfortunately a lot of you might just not get at all. But the red crossbill looks a lot like a character from a webcomic that I like called Homestar Runner. So if there's any like 30 or 40-year-olds who watch the Homestar Runner, let me know in the chat. There's not a lot of us left. But anyway, you can see they sort of share this weird underbite, and beady eyes is one of my favorite characters from this series. But the more I dug into the bird, the weirder I realized they were. So it happens to be that crossbills have this really well documented habit of showing up in unexpected places. So here you can see a drawing from a 13th century naturalist named Matthew Paris, which documented crossbills appearing randomly in the United Kingdom. Not in Scotland where they are expected, but kind of just in, in and around town. And there's also this legendary poem describing a crossbill attempting to remove the nails from Jesus as he died on the cross. So, really interesting bird with a lot of really weird lore. But of course, it's not just that, but their biology is also extremely weird. Their beaks aren't crossed because they look funny or because they tried to pull on a metal nail, but it's because they are built to pry open the scales of pine cones. And then, like you see here in this photo that I took, they use their tongue to yoink the seeds out and then kind of deftly take the paper coating off of the seed so they can eat the pine nut inside. But even those beaks are special. So crossbills actually sort into different groups based on the size of their beaks. Some of them have larger beaks and some of them have smaller beaks. And so this different beak size and measurement is sometimes, and in some cases, tailored specifically to feed on the cones of different conifer species. So a smaller coned, like a western or eastern hemlock, for example, a crossbill with a smaller bill would be adapted to eat that seed, versus like a really big, thick cone, like you see these pitch pines and Japanese pine cones here, would be more easily accessed by a crossbill with a bigger beak. Now the crossbills, oops, well, there's a photo of a crossbill. Oh, wait, this is so cool. Wait, let me just play this video for you anyway, so you can see what they do. This is a video of a crossbill that I believe Tom Johnson took, feeding on the scales of it looks like Japanese black pine in Cape May, New Jersey. And you can really see how amazing they are at this. So they use their crossed beak as almost like a forcep, and then they sort of use their tongue to deftly get that little seed out. And there you go. That's how it works. Anyway. So they don't have to study each other's beak shapes. In fact, the way that the crossbills tell each other apart is based on the sounds they make. Specifically, it's a sound that we call the flight call. And each group of crossbills, in each of their kind of corresponding beaks, they have a different flight call. That they can recognize each other with. So what you see here are the 12 different flight calls that we recognize here in North America. Now, some of these call types, we call them, are limited just to specific locations, which I've put, for example, Newfoundland has its own crossbill. There's a Central American crossbill. There are crossbills that specialize in Sierra Madre, southwestern US and Mexico. But then basically the rest of them just move around a lot. And this is really, really weird. So why is this weird? Well, on the left, you see the map of the different subspecies of the fox sparrow. Now, what you'll notice is that this map is a map, that these, they have designated areas where each of the subspecies live. This is really important to the definition of a subspecies. Generally, we tie them to a geographic area. Now, on the right side, you see the crossbills, and crossbills, these call types don't actually stick just to one geographic area, these ones that move around. In some cases, they will have a zone where they are most likely found, which is these purple ones. Then they'll have zones that they might go visit if there's no food in the purple zone, which is the light purple areas. And then they have these blue areas, which is where they go if they run out of food. And so you'll see that these different wandering call type groups are just traveling all around the United States looking for food. And it's kind of breaks the rules of what we expect birds should be doing. Um, Now, it's pretty interesting in the Northeast. I think most of you being in Vermont should have some familiarity with crossbills being around, but it's actually pretty recently that we established that crossbills belong here. So for a long time, there were specimens of crossbills being taken from the northeastern United States, but then in the 20th century, they were really rare. So scientists didn't actually know if crossbills were kind of native to our area or if they were just experiencing these West Coast crossbills that were just coming randomly on eruptions. Um, so they had to figure that out. And what's really cool is that in just the past couple of decades, community science apps like eBird have allowed people to submit their recordings of crossbills. And there's now this immense database of crossbill recordings available on the Macaulay Library. So, what a team from the Finch Research Network and others were able to do is basically take a bunch of these call types that they were analyzing, specifically one from the West Coast that they thought was traveling to the East Coast, and then compare it to the ones that they were measuring in the East Coast. And then they determined that actually all along there really was this northeastern crossbill, which is now, funny enough, the newest crossbill call type is our friendly neighborhood northeastern red crossbill, which we call type 12. And that paper was only published in the past couple of years. So it's only recently that we established that crossbills were kind of always in the Northeast and not simply birds that were traveling here from the Northwest. And a lot of that is because the forests in the Northeast have actually been regenerating over the past couple of decades. And now there's a lot more habitat and therefore a lot more food for these crossbills. So they're thriving in a way in our area that they weren't thriving before. Now, of course, that doesn't explain why a flock of crossbills flew over my apartment. Now, I live in a place that looks like this, specifically in the Brooklyn part of it. That's closer to the water and the sort of lower left. And we don't really have a lot of conifer forests here in New York City. Mostly we have street trees, and most of those street trees are deciduous. And that kind of brings us to these movements of crossbills. So now, a lot of you as birders in a northern area have probably heard of the winter finch forecast. Now, crossbills are like the one of the hallmark winter finches. It's the one that a lot of the finch fans get the most excited about because of all of the reasons I've explained. And as I said, what they're doing is they are following food sources around. So typically, they'll end up in places where there are a lot of cones on the trees. And then a sort of observation we've had is that trees across the forest often are synchronizing in their production of seeds. So what probably they're doing is they're trying to make enough seeds to outcompete all of the seed predators like squirrels and crossbills. But then in some years, their populations of squirrels get too high, and so all the trees basically conspire to stop making cones. And then, unfortunately for the squirrels, if they can't go anywhere, they don't have enough food to survive the winter, but crossbills have wings, and so they're able to fly. So we then call these food motivated movements, or sort of lack of resource motivated movements where these birds fly elsewhere, as eruptions. And eruptions is really like the crown jewel. Like that's what we're always hoping for when we get these winter finch forecasts, is that these birds might erupt beyond where they're expected and show up in strange places. But what's really interesting is that, especially with our hometown northeastern crossbill, we're learning that there is quite a bit of predictability to what they're doing. So sure, they are erupting in a sense, but what it seems to be is that they actually are quite plastic. They can really eat a bunch of different cones. So this is a list of the kinds of deciduous trees we see here in the northeastern forest. Of course, there's our spruces, our hemlocks, tamaracks, our pines, and then even a selection of coastal pines and invasive pines. And it turns out that our northeastern crossbills seem to be able to move around almost in a predictable way, chasing these different cones that they're looking for. So when they're up in sort of down east Maine, Vermont, the boreal forest, that's when they'll be going after your white spruces and your red spruces. But then in the years where there's no cones on the spruce, well, then they'll move places such as the southern tier of New York, New England, where they'll be looking for their pines. And then, of course, if there's no spruces and no eastern white pine or red pine, then they might move even further south to New Jersey or coastal New York, where they would feed on things like pitch pine and the invasive Japanese or the introduced Japanese black pine. And here you can see one on a plant that she's not going to be eating that is cedar. So that still doesn't answer why they're in New York City. And the reason is because New York City is actually an amazing place to see birds. Some of you may know this, but the city is a migratory bird hotspot. So, of course, every year, billions of birds migrate between their breeding grounds in the northern forests and then their wintering grounds in the tropics and beyond. And now, New York City sits, given its location, right in this Atlantic flyway, kind of in almost like choke point in the Atlantic flyway. It forces a lot of birds to visit no matter what. But then when they arrive in the city, they're met by a literal sea of concrete with just a couple of islands of green spaces, such as Central Park, Prospect, Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge. And it's actually really amazing. You can experience this phenomenon kind of anywhere in the city. Often just looking up or looking in your street trees in New York City will reveal some pretty amazing birds. So then, on that fateful day, November 29th of 2022, I did what I always do on a nice fall day with northwest winds, hoping to see my migrating birds. And I headed up to my roof to see what I could find. Now, crossbills were already moving this year as part of an eruption that had been predicted by the winter finch forecast. So I was hopeful that maybe I would get lucky. But then I got a call from one of my friends who was in a park just, maybe a mile east of where I was standing. And he called me frantically that he had a flock of crossbills flying west and they were heading my way. I had to get on the roof. I had to listen. They were coming. And just a few minutes later, I was able to record these birds as they flew over. You can see the sort of faint recording here and matching up with our northeastern type 12 crossbill. And so from that day forward, I was officially able to include the red crossbill on the list of birds that I had seen from my apartment. Um, Now, not to brag, but I have seen a lot of amazing birds from my apartment. I recently moved a couple blocks away, and my new apartment has some view of the water, so I also have amazing birds. On the left, that is a Swainson's hawk I photographed with the Statue of Liberty. Swainson's hawks are not supposed to be in New York City, but there was one we all knew was kind of trolling around the Brooklyn waterfront, so I was able to see it from my bedroom. And then this is a cerulean warbler that I somehow was able to catch from the roof of my building. I heard it singing. I ran up to the roof, and then this thing was like 5 feet away from me. So some amazing bird watching experiences that we have here in New York City, even from the sidewalk. But I don't think anything will ever beat the feeling of having my favorite bird, this nomadic bird of rural boreal forests with no interest in New York City whatsoever, fly right over my house, and there it is on my official fridge list where I write all of the birds that I've seen from my apartment. So thank you so much all for having me tonight. I really appreciate it. If you're interested, this is a QR code for my book. Otherwise, Wild NYC book should hopefully get it to you. And then please do check out finchnetwork.org, the Finch Research Network. I maintain the Finch Research newsletter for our donors, so you can catch my writing wherever, if you either of those places. So thank you all, and thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Ryan. I have a connection with you too because just this week I was outside and I heard a red crossbill fly over right above
I
me.
haven't gotten mine
So
yet this year, but I'm hopeful.
yeah, it was a new yard bird for me. So I can relate and know that excitement. So thank you so much. So we are going to hear from Sophia Balanek about an amazing phenomenon that actually scares some people. But if you love birds, like most of us do, this phenomenon is one of the fascinating things about winter. So go ahead, Sophia.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about the winter crow roosts that come into Burlington. So yeah, I live in Burlington. I'm a recent UVM graduate. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm a birder, photographer, and a writer. And last spring, I wanted to do a project on what I would call, I think this is a phenomenon of these crow congregations. So I worked with an anthropology professor who just loves crows and never really had the time to study them in any way. And we worked on an independent study and produced a project that combined personal writing, photography, and interviews. And these are the photos from the story that I gathered over the course of the winter. And I'm going to read some reflections that I've had in the past year on this, and then read some excerpts from the story itself, which is much longer than we have time for. So I'll start. Um, I love watching the sky fade as sunlight morphs into blue and the world slows down. And then shortly after, hundreds of black-winged creatures dawn on the city in a loud but not unwelcome nighttime ritual. I enjoy being surrounded by swirling and calling. I like walking home at midnight and hearing rustling and a soft call from the trees above me, but not being able to see just how many crows there are. And this project wasn't so much of a scientific why are they here story, but more of an exploration into the effect I think that they have on the city. And I lived in Burlington for over 4 years now, and I always loved birds, but I only noticed the crows in my second year flying over the main green at sunset downtown as I walked to my dorm. And I'd periodically catch them as they flew into the city at dusk and then settle into their roosts in town. And then my senior spring, I just decided I would intentionally explore this and document it, and also talk to people who I knew liked the crows. And I went out at least once a week, usually on a day with a pretty sunset, but also in other types of weather because the crows don't care. And I found the roost. And last winter, it was usually over by 127 or on the corner of North Winooski and Grant Streets. And sometimes it was in my own backyard. And I thought about what I was drawn to photograph, the shapes they make as they flock and deflock, the small interactions between a few individuals, what spooks them, the way people stop and look at them, and the way they dawn into the city. I enjoy watching the crows when there's a colorful sunset. I love how stark they look against the blue, pink, purple, and orange crisp of a winter sky. I love climbing to a high point to watch the different groups fly into town, 35 birds at a time, a subtle announcement of their arrival. And it's a phenomenon that happens every night, whether you or I realize it. I thought about how this made me feel, smaller maybe, but observed and watched, but also sometimes not even noticed. It just happens above us in this aerial layer of our world that we can't reach. I talked to people who seek them out and people who never noticed them in years. I spoke to friends and wildlife professors who gave me the biological perspective on why the crows do this. But with everyone, I tried to pull out an emotional, personal answer about what they think of the crows. I knew that thousands of big, dark birds descending into our neighborhoods had to have an effect on people. And it wasn't always describable, but I knew it was significant. I think everyone had their own reason for why the crows resonated with them, whether it's the routine of it, the chaos, the way they communicate, or even a fear of them. And it's also rare to see such huge groups of animals in most places. And one of my friends had said, it's like seeing a field completely full of flowers. A monopoly like that is so beautiful it can bring you to tears. And some people remarked on how the crows seem to watch us in our daily movements, our patterns and routines. And others feel the urge to count them. And there are always so many more than you think could fill the sky like that. I like the temporary communities that form around these birds. I always text my friends when I see them congregating in their backyard, and they tell me when they saw them flying through downtown. I see people stopped on the streets, necks craned upward, and transfer just a moment before carrying on. A professor I talked to who studied kin-centric ecology remarked that they see these congregations as a social interaction, which is an aspect of crow behavior that fascinates many around the world, but one that humans don't have access to knowing what exactly is happening, yet we are a part of it at the same time. They have a relationship with our city that we built and use it in this routine way while our little lives just carry on underneath. And I think for me, it's the timeless and ephemeral quality. Every year, every night, from October to March, they will be roosting in town, whether anyone notices or not. And to me, the crows feel untouchable. They make me feel like someone's watching over me or looking out for me, and their arrival is like an announcement. And together, they're a unit in their movements and behaviors. I think, and others agree, that there's something mystical or symbolic or spiritual to these birds, and maybe that's a uniquely human trait to ascribe this to them. It also made me think about winter as a season, as a harsh season that demands work. It takes effort to shovel driveways, to hike, to feel good. It takes effort to search for beauty. But yet, I'd argue that winter is the most beautiful of all seasons because it's so subtle. I talked to Teague O'Connor, who runs Crow's Path in Burlington, and seemingly the most avid source on these birds, and he said it's one of the most profound expressions of seasonality that we have. So even on days when I was actively following the crows, and then there were some days that I didn't naturally notice them, I had to go looking. It's a simple yet profound beauty that you can just stumble upon. And yet, come spring, it suddenly stops and it gets quiet. And I think winter is like that. It's tough, but it's also beautiful when the purple sunlight is shining on the mountaintops at dusk and the cardinals are bright red. And then the next day it's blustery and icy and cloudy until it's not anymore, and kind of like a dream. So even though there are thousands and it's a huge, loud event, you really have to look up and listen and be present with these birds. It's an ephemeral experience in that they're only there if you search for their roost, they're only flying if you look up, and they're only cawing if you listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Connection to you as well. I love crow roosts and they get my attention all the time. So
It's great.
okay, up next we have Scott Sainsbury. Scott joined our Friends board upon moving to the Champlain Islands a few years ago, and he dug right in with all the tasks to support the refuge. So he's going to tell you a story about special gulls that can be found here if you're lucky enough to spot them. So go ahead, Scott.
Thanks. Let me get shared up here. All right, good. So I would like to share with everybody tonight a birding experience I had 16 years ago, and yet it remains paramount in my mind of some of the encounters, many encounters of birds I've had since then. And I guess one of the problems with this idea is that it's about a gull, and everybody's going to tune out, right? Because who doesn't see a lot of gulls? Whoops, sorry, did I lose? There it is. Yeah, who doesn't see a lot of gulls? But this gull is really, really different because I don't know if you noticed in the title page, but I gave the credits of where this person, Delphin Gonzalez, took this picture, and it was in Svalbard. And if you know where Svalbard is, it's a long way from here. um, and I think I calculated it someplace like 3,200 miles or something like that. And it's north up in Greenland, way north of England or Iceland or even Scandinavia. So this bird is a long way from here. And the place where that picture was taken was Negrabreen, Svalbard. And only recently are birders starting to go up there because it's so remote. And it got me curious when I heard there was one in Vermont. And so I looked at the range map and it looked like this. And so now we're looking at the world from the North Pole. And I've noted that this is the Arctic Circle. You can see the little dots going around the circle. And these guys only tiptoe south of the Arctic Circle in a couple of places. So they live their entire lives in areas that most of us will probably rarely, if ever go ourselves. So the chance of seeing one made it seem like, well, maybe this is different than other gulls, you know. But will I be able to tell it different? I mean, all these gulls, even the experts have trouble pulling the herring gulls apart and so on. So will I get it? And I also thought about, will I ever get a chance to go someplace where they live and breed? And I found this picture on the web, and this is where they tend to breed. So I don't think I'm going there either. So all these forces came together. I don't know if you can see it, all the little white dots on the cliffs here, but all those things came together and said, you ought to go find this bird while it's in Vermont. So that brings us to 2010 on Lake Champlain. And we didn't have Facebook then. We didn't have much, but I think we did have the Vermont bird list. And the bird had come up, and I was living out in the Mad River Valley at the time, and it was being seen up near Rouse's Point, but on the Vermont side. And I thought, well, I don't know, it's worth a shot. Maybe I'll drive up there and see if I can find it. So I nobody was around that day, so I went by myself. And um, I came up there, and here comes Route 2 across at Rouse's Point, for those who know it. And here on the Vermont side, the bird had been seen several times in Kelly Bay. And there was some open water, so I stopped there and spent some time with the scope and looked for the bird and found a few gulls on the edge of the ice, but I didn't find the bird. And I thought, well, it's kind of windy and the wind's coming from the west, and often the birds will sit on the east shore when that's the case to stay out of the waves and the wind. And I looked across, and sure enough, there was some open water over in Rouse's Point. So across the bridge I went and got over to Rouse's Point over here and looked all through the marinas. If y'all have been there, it's like this, right? Except it was icy and cold and snowy. But, I was over in this area looking through the marinas and seeing nothing and seeing nobody. And I scoped along the shore a little bit and didn't see anything. And then I noticed way down here, you might notice there's a jetty that goes out into the lake. And I thought, I think I see some people on that jetty. And being a birder, if you see people in a crazy place, they've got to be birders, right? So I figured I better go down there. So off I went down there. And when I got down there, it looked like this. Um, and imagine this all covered in snow and ice. And so it's not the easiest thing to go hiking on to find a bird. But there was a person near the shore, and there were some people way out at the end of that thing. And she said to me, "Are you looking for the ivory gull?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, I think they have it out there." And I said, "Who's out there?" And she said, "Well, Brian Pfeiffer and some guys." And I know Brian. He lived in the same town. He lived right behind me. I'll go out there and find Brian. So um, I start walking out this crazy jetty, and I've got my head down because you really, you got to pay attention. And I get about I got about, a third of the way out, maybe halfway out. And I waved to the guys out at the end, and they waved back, and I did a thumbs up, and they did a thumbs up back at me. And then they pointed out in the lake and to signify that the bird was out there. And I got pretty excited, and I'm walking along and paying attention to what I'm doing. And then all of a sudden they've left where they were, and they're walking toward me, and they're all screaming at me. And I raise my head, and this happens. This bird is flying straight at me coming down the jetty, and it's no higher than eye level and coming right at me. And when it passed by me, I literally could have reached out and touched the bird. And I thought, I'm in Svalbard. I mean, I'm on another part of the planet. This thing is right here, and it left such an impression. The wings were porcelain. You could see light through them, and other gulls look like they're all developed by product developers. Like here's a gull, and then they make another gull and another gull and another gull, and they're all little iterations off the first one. But this is like a gull designed by an artist. I mean, it's an entirely different thing. It's just a wonderful, wonderful bird, and such a wonderful thing when it went past me. And pretty soon, Brian and everybody came along, and we walked on down the jetty a ways, and we found it again. And it had found something that an ice fisherman had left it, and it was eating, and we got a chance to spend time with it and take some pictures and so on. So it's just one of those indelible experiences. And when people ask me what's the most significant bird you've seen, and I'm not, a 10,000 birder, but I've been a few places and enjoyed birds on different continents and so on. And but this one really stands out in my mind. So I hope you enjoyed meeting the ivory gull this evening. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott. You're the first presenter that I don't have a connection to because I have never seen an ivory gull, and so maybe someday. Great story. All right. Next up, we have Ali Wagner with yet another amazing phenomenon that happened a few years back that some of us were able to witness.
Okay, so I'm from Huntington. I'm a retired educator. Currently, I call myself a granny nature nanny. And I like to think that I'm a reformed obsessive birder. I contribute to several Vermont birding groups and conduct surveys and monitoring for different organizations. And so I'm going to talk about the eruption miracle of 2013 and 14 of the snowy owl. And I have 4 specific experiences I had that I'm going to read about. The first one was on November 30th of 2013. I stood on Gage Road with some friends, hoping to see some short-eared owls come out at dusk. And while waiting, I noticed something distant in a tree between Gage Road and the goose viewing area along Route 17. It's always a good idea to check the retailed hawks, also known as fugitive plastic bags. I set up my scope, zoomed in, and realized this plastic bag had feathers. There's a snowy owl in the scope, I said to my friends, but they were all chatting and they didn't hear me. So I said it again. There's a snowy owl in the scope. No one heard me. I finally yelled, "Look in the scope!" I was afraid the owl was going to fly off and no one would be able to see it, but that was not the case for this year. This ended up being the first snowy reported in Addison County at the time, and no one knew what was to come. This particular owl that you're looking at here could have been the one that we were looking at, and it could have been one that stayed in Vermont, or it could have traveled on from that day. But I consider this owl here. I took these pictures on different days, as you can tell. It's the most photogenic of all the snowies that were documented during the eruption year. It was reliably seen at the goose viewing area in one particular tree. And anyone who regularly viewed photographers' shots could likely identify it simply by looking at the branches of the tree. Then on December 30th, I took 8 Heinsberg kids. I call them the Heinsbirders. And 4 kids, 8 people. And these are people from the Heinsberg community. So we went on a field trip, and I used entries from the VT Bird listserv and eBird to assure that we would find some owls that had been seen most reliably in consistent locations. So we set out on a really cold day, and they were incredibly excited for a chance to see the famous bird from Harry Potter. They saw the reliable resident at the goose viewing area, and then I explained the procedure for how to celebrate a life bird with the life bird boogie before we headed down to the junction of Route 17 and Jersey Street. As our caravan of cars approached that intersection, Helen noticed a mob of crows, and a snowy behind the farm outbuildings was perched on a fence post. It dropped down to the ground and was harder to see, but the excitement of the brief view did not disappoint, because within what felt like seconds, another snowy, and I called, "Snowy!" and everyone turned around to see it as it flew across the fields along the south side of Route 17, heading towards Jersey Street. It could only be described as magical serendipity as it flew low directly over the 4 kids, and then on its way to a perch atop a utility pole on the road's junction. I'm sure no one noticed the frigid cold at that time. Then on February 8th, in 2014, I decided to head west from home in Huntington to now what I was calling Snowy Owl Central in Addison County for some afternoon birding. And what started out as spontaneous birding with no specific goals quickly became a personal challenge to see how many snowies I could locate with just 3 hours of light left in the day. We can look at the next slide. How do we do that, Julie? Okay. By this point in the season, it was pretty likely the owls had established their territories. And so I created my path as I drove along to see who I could find. And I started up where the two hot spots are. The first owl was on Walker Road, and from there I went to see the reliable resident at the goose viewing area, and another one was seen at Brillier. The next stop, I tallied one at the junction of 17 and Jersey Street, and then another at Wag's Store, and then one at the junction of Route 125 and Town Line, two more on Middle Road, and the 11th one on Norton Town Road. 11 snowies between 2:08 and 5:10 p.m. Then on February 12th, Ellie George suggested to Ian Worley that a special survey take place. And with just 4 days of planning, over 40 volunteers were organized to scan 15 towns, covering an area 20 miles from the north to south and just 3 to 5 miles in width. The protocol and design of the survey was similar to a winter bird count, with each team assigned to a specific area. Teams pinpointed their snowy observations to specific time and location to assure the compilers that an owl was unlikely to be counted more than once. And all of these observations were put into eBird. You can show the next slide, Julie. I reached out to Ian for specifics about the results since he published a report over 10 years ago about the Blitz. He eagerly dug it up so I could share parts of it with you. Here are his thoughts about why Addison County is the place for snowy owls. We can thank the late stages of glaciation for this special topography. Large Lake Vermont, dammed by a glacier just to the north, 10,000 years ago, deposited extensive glacial ground clays at its bottom, creating the flat clay plain landscape of today along Lake Champlain, which itself is a remnant of Lake Vermont. Over 200 years of farming has created the large open fields and the prey found at their margins and within. Perhaps because the sprawling, flat, clay plain agricultural land of western Addison County resembles the owl summer Arctic breeding grounds, an aggregation of snowies soon built and has remained resident now into the second half of February. In his comments about the results of the Snowy Owls Blitz, he said a total of 124 observations of snowy owls were made by the observers. They were carefully mapped along with the time of day seen, and from that we conclude that at least 24 individual birds were tallied. There was speculation that more would be discovered due to the concentration of birders, but such was not the case. In fact, the area of birds was quite constrained, even though through this winter birds have been seen beyond this area. However, the total number is similar to counts on previous weeks. So, in conclusion, I would like to sing what I'm calling the Snowbird Lifebird Boogie Ballad. And you can show the last picture, but don't play it. Don't play the video yet. And I'm going to sing a song to you. I think some of you will recognize the tune, and I don't think that a certain Jed would mind. Here's a little song about four adventurers, kids known as Heinsbergers. One cold day they were pining for an owl, not the likely bird you see out on the prowl. Snowy, that is, Bubo Scandiacus, movie star. Parents were willing to chauffeur the kids there, but kinfolk said, if only we knew where. Listserv said Addison's a place to be, so they caravanned in cars to 17 and Jersey Street, that is, fence posts, farm equipment. Tucked against the vegetation on the frigid ground, across from the viewing area, the first snow we found. Then a couple down the road put on an awesome show with close encounter flybys as we gawked from down below. Wingspan, that is, golden eyes, raptor rapture. So we thank Vermont farmers for your hospitality, since you have guided all of us to this locality. And yes, I admit, it's given me a chance to see 8 happy birders do the Lifebird Boogie Dance. Celebrate, that is, pure joy birding. Okay, and this is a very short, very poorly made video of the Lifebird Boogie of these kids. And that's it.
Thank you, Allie. Okay, that brings us to Ian Worley is going to close with a poem that he wrote, and he's going to read for us. So Ian is a longtime professor and former director of the UVM Environmental Program. He's a passionate advocate for and a participant in community science. And in my opinion, the most thorough past eBird reviewer that you will ever encounter. He kept me on my toes while he was doing that. Um, so here's Ian with his poem about this particular snowy owl eruption that you just heard about.
That's me.
That's you.
Hi. Um, hey, Allie, thanks for that. It's just much fun to relive that event. Julie, thanks for mentioning the reviewing. For those people who are not eBirders, um, eBird has a program of quality control where volunteers review the observations and documentations of birds, bird counts, to make the data worthwhile for the mammoth projects that eBird is now delivering. About 12 years ago, eBird put out a message that was shortly after it went international, that there were some sites needing reviewing that nobody had volunteered for. And I looked at them, and they were all really, really remote and hard to get to, hard to access, and very little birding going on around the world. So I volunteered to review all of them. And that didn't come out of the blue. I've always had an interest in the most remote islands and archipelagos of Earth. So for the last 12 to 15 years, I've been in retirement. I've been basically a full-time reviewer around the world and the Southern Ocean, my sites, the Indian Ocean, South Atlantic, North Atlantic. What's the one up north there with that Svalbard, or the Arctic Ocean?
Right.
And there he is. And basically full time. And I've had, still doing this, some almost 50 different sites I review for or have reviewed for, including all of Greenland, Svalbard, and all the French sites in the Indian Ocean, the islands there. For some of these, it was a short tenure, but for several, it's been all those years. And also, I've created hotspot systems for many of these very remote places, with the idea that when birders do make it there, eBirders, they will already find a list of places that are worthwhile to bird and put their findings with other birders. The last thing is a couple of examples. One of my venues is Bouvet Island, the most isolated island in the world. Um, Tristan da Cunha, which has the most isolated human population um, uh, um, in life there. Um, Svalbard, I've been reviewing that for 15 years, so I know that place pretty well. And all of this is being done from my third of the kitchen table, which is where the computer is. Um, so it's a way of traveling um, with, I've counted up all the islands that are in these archipelagos and on sites, and it's over 3,500. So the amount of knowledge that I have gained in this is stupendous. Um, the workload for about 10 years, every year I had about 12,000 items that I reviewed a year, both in Vermont and then in all these other sites. So that's what I've been up to. And if you had noticed, I had disappeared from the Vermont reviewing. That's where I had been. So I hope that anybody who has an opportunity to bird for eBird or discover eBird will recognize that there's not only the everyday birder, but there are people behind the scenes who are part of the whole um, exercise and the what eBird has to offer. Okay, so um, I've lived 50 years in Addison County, 53, I guess it is. First bird that went on my record was um, a night bird. And I've always been interested in the night. So my personal birding has been with birds of the night, during the night, and of the um, twilight birds. So I got a lot of bird records, but it don't really go anywhere. I just see what's going on around me. So with that in mind, here's this owl thing that happened, and then it was over. Well, a little bit after it was over, I thought about it, and here's what I wrote. Winter of the Snowy Owls. Never in memory were there so many winter snowy owls. Atop trees, on silos and tractors, by roads, on fence posts, in distant fields. We saw them with ease, but never before they saw us first, with their laser eyes, unblinking as they stared with no acknowledgement, only indifference. From those perches high, with fields all about, what did they ponder? Could it be the anticipation of the return to tundra, lemmings, and mates? Could it be the busyness of local trucks, cows, and pesky ravens? I suspect it was nighttime dinners. Now late March, mostly gone are winter's snow and the striking white owls that rightly bear that name. Along Slang Road, I slowly drive the muddied road in hopes of finding one lingering image of the Arctic in those glowering golden eyes. To my left and right, the last snow piles hide tucked in the shade of plow-turned clods. Is there a snowy owl there? Or over there? Or beyond? Aha! I saw! Beyond the ditch, across rows of furrows, the perfect profile of our winter's guest. One last bird. Alas, but no, there was no movement, no twitch of beak or spin of head, no gilded eyes in the sea of snow white and dirt gray, just the pile of snow soon to melt, as the owls had done in their own way. Saddened, I drove to the end of the road, turned and headed back, knowing that the fateful end of the winter of snowy owls, as was certain to be, had arrived. Our goodbyes and we wish you wells had been made. Be well in the tundra and send us your chicks next year or some year thereafter. Driving slowly by the furrowed field, I took one last brief glance of reminiscence. The pile of snow was preening.
Thank you, Ian.
You're welcome.
It's great that you have that to remember that incredible season. All right, that is a wrap for this year's Bird Tales. I want to thank all of our storytellers for sharing your knowledge and your experiences and your good birding with us tonight. And for everybody else, I'd just like to thank you for just sharing the evening and listening along. It's always good to have you, and it's always a fun time just listening to what people want to talk about when it comes to birds. So, thanks for joining us. Don't forget to head to our website if you'd like to give us some feedback or drop in a donation or become a member. We look forward to seeing you there. So thank you. Have a great night, everybody.